Have you ever wondered where true strength comes from? Is it found in the breadth of a person's shoulders, the authority in their voice, or the rank pinned to their collar? We are taught to look for heroes in the spotlight, on the pedestals we build for them. But what if the most important person in the room is the one no one is looking at? What if the one person who can save everyone is the one they sent away to be forgotten? This is a story about a woman named Alara, and it begins not with a bang, but with the quiet, almost invisible tap of a finger on a digital screen. In the sterile, humming heart of Central Command, a place of polished chrome and cold, blue light, hundreds of officers and technicians moved with practiced urgency. They were the nerve center of the reclamation effort, a massive initiative to stabilize and reclaim the fracture zones, vast swathes of land rendered uninhabitable by catastrophic seismic shifts. These zones were treacherous, unpredictable worlds of their own, with landscapes that changed by the hour and ecosystems that had mutated into hostile predators. From this secure bunker, miles away from the danger, strategies were born, supplies were dispatched, and the lives of soldiers were managed like assets on a balance sheet. Alara was a part of this machine, but she was a gear so small she was practically invisible. Her official title was Logistics Clerk, Grade 3. To most, she was just the quiet woman with tired eyes who ensured that data packets were correctly filed and supply manifests were cross-referenced. She kept her head down, her hoodie often pulled low, her face illuminated only by the soft glow of her terminal. She never spoke in the loud, declarative tones of the officers who strode past her desk. Her voice, when she used it, was soft, hesitant, as if she were apologizing for taking up space. But while her presence was muted, her mind was a roaring fire. Her fingers didn't just file data, they danced across it, finding patterns no one else saw. She didn't just cross-reference manifests, she understood them. She knew that a delayed shipment of synthetic protein bars to an outpost meant more than hungry soldiers, it meant compromised patrol endurance, which in turn meant a 12% higher chance of an encounter with a territorial graven beast during twilight hours. She saw the entire intricate web, the cause and effect that stretched from a misplaced crate in a warehouse to a life lost in the jagged canyons of the fracture. Her obsession was born from a past she never spoke of, a past where she had been a child in a city that the earth had swallowed whole, a victim of a poorly managed evacuation where the logistics had failed. She had survived, but her family had not. So now, she traced the lines of causality with a fierce, silent devotion, determined to prevent the universe from making the same mistake twice. One afternoon, the air in the command center crackled with a new level of tension. Captain Jax, a man whose ambition was as sharp as the crease in his uniform, was briefing his team on Operation Serpent's Tooth. He was a man carved from confidence, his voice booming with the certainty of someone who had never been truly tested and found wanting. His plan was bold, a deep insertion into the notoriously unstable Tartarus sector to retrieve vital geological survey data. He pointed at a massive holographic map, his finger tracing a confident red line through a labyrinth of ravines. "Our route is direct and fast," he declared, his chest puffed out. "We punch in, grab the data, and we're out before the zone knows what hit it." The officers around him nodded, their faces reflecting his own assurance. But at her small desk in the corner, Alara's blood ran cold. Her fingers flew across her own terminal, pulling up subterranean strata charts, old seismic logs, and recent atmospheric pressure readings, data streams no field captain would ever think to consult. The red line on Jax's map, so clean and direct, sliced directly over a deep-seated, dormant fault line, a subfracture that the standard military maps, updated only quarterly, didn't show. Worse, her atmospheric data suggested a pressure drop that often preceded deep earth tremors in that region. The plan wasn't just risky, it was a suicide march into a geological ambush. She felt the familiar knot of fear and duty tighten in her stomach. To speak up was to invite ridicule, to challenge a captain as a mere clerk. But to stay silent felt like a betrayal of every life that would be gambled on Jax's ignorance. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of ozone and recycled fear, and stood up from her desk. Her movement was so uncharacteristic that a few nearby technicians glanced over, surprised. She walked towards the briefing circle, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She felt like a ghost trying to materialize in the land of the living, and for a moment she almost turned back. But then she saw the faces of the young soldiers who would be following Jax, their trust absolute, and their fate sealed, and her hesitation hardened into resolve. Her quiet duty had just become a terrifying, public responsibility. Elara waited for a pause in Captain Jax's confident pronouncements, a small gap in the wall of his self-assurance. When it came, she stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly behind her back to hide their trembling. "Captain," she began, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the low hum of the command center like a shard of glass. Every head turned. Jax, mid-sentence, stopped and slowly turned to face her. His eyes, which had been alight with ambition, narrowed into slits of pure annoyance. He did not know her name. He only saw a low-ranking clerk in a worn-out uniform, an insignificant cog, who had just dared to interrupt the main engine. "What is it, clerk?" he asked, the title a deliberate insult. He made no effort to hide his impatience. Elara swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Sir, your proposed route for Operation Serpent's Tooth. It intersects with the Tethys subfracture." She pointed a hesitant finger towards the holographic map. "The standard cartography is outdated. My analysis of recent deep Earth resonance scans shows the fault line is under increasing tectonic stress. Combined with the current barometric pressure drop, there is a 78% probability of a significant seismic event in that corridor within the next 72 hours." A ripple of murmurs went through the assembled officers. They weren't murmurs of consideration but of disbelief and amusement. A clerk was quoting deep Earth resonance scans. Jax's face, which had been a mask of irritation, hardened into a concrete wall of fury. He felt the eyes of his subordinates on him, and in that moment, Elara had not just questioned his plan, she had questioned his authority, his competence, his very identity as a leader. He strode over to her until he was towering above her, his shadow engulfing her small frame. "And you are," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "A seismologist? A geologist?" "No," he answered his own question, "you're a data entry clerk. Your job is to file reports, not to question operational command." He turned to the other officers, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "It seems we have a tactical genius in our midst, hidden away in the logistics division. Perhaps you'd like to lead the mission yourself, clerk." The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. It echoed in the vast room, each chuckle a small stone thrown at Elara. She stood her ground, her face pale but her eyes unwavering. "Sir, with respect, the data is unequivocal. The risk is not acceptable. There is an alternative route to the west. It's longer, through more difficult terrain, but it bypasses the fault line entirely." Jax's smile vanished. Her persistence had pushed him past humiliation and into pure rage. He saw her not as a concerned subordinate, but as a direct challenge to the rigid hierarchy that gave him his power. He would make an example of her. He would crush this flicker of insubordination so completely that no one would ever dare question him again. "You want to see the fracture zone up close, clerk," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low growl. "You feel you have a special insight into the dangers out there. Fine. I'm granting your wish." He turned to his aide. "Reassign clerk, what is your name?" "Elara, sir," she said softly. "Reassign clerk Elara to Forward Operating Base Delta." Effective immediately, a stunned silence fell over the room. Even the officers who had laughed now looked on with a kind of horrified shock. FOB Delta was not just a forward base, it was the bleeding edge, the most remote and embattled outpost in the entire reclamation effort. It was situated deep within the Tartarus sector itself, a tiny, beleaguered island in a sea of chaos. A posting to FOB Delta was widely considered a punishment detail, a place where careers and lives went to die. It was undersupplied, constantly harassed by local fauna, and perpetually on the verge of being overrun or swallowed by the unstable earth. Sending a logistics clerk there was not a reassignment, it was a death sentence. "You think you understand the front lines?" Jax spat at her, his face inches from hers. "Go and get a real education. Maybe then you'll learn to appreciate the decisions made by your superiors and keep your analysis to yourself." He turned his back on her, dismissing her, as if she were a piece of trash he had just thrown away. "Now, as I was saying," he continued to his team, his voice booming once more, "the route is direct and fast." Alara stood frozen for a moment, the cold reality of her new assignment washing over her. She had tried to save them, and for her efforts, she was being sent into the very heart of the danger she had warned them about. She felt a profound sense of failure, not for herself, but for the men who would march into that trap. As she walked back to her desk to collect her few personal belongings, no one would meet her eyes. They had already cast her out. She was no longer a part of the humming, orderly machine. She was now just another piece of expendable equipment being shipped to the front. The transport shuttle that carried Alara to FOB Delta was a rattling metal cage, a stark contrast to the silent, climate-controlled efficiency of Central Command. The journey took her over landscapes that grew progressively more fractured and alien. The neat grid lines of reclaimed territory gave way to jagged canyons that scarred the earth like open wounds. Twisted, metallic-looking flora clawed at the sky, and vast plains of gray dust were punctuated by steaming geothermal vents. This was the world she had only ever seen as data points and topographical overlays. Now its raw, menacing reality pressed in on her from all sides. FOB Delta, when it finally appeared, was less a base and more of a scar. It was a small, circular encampment surrounded by a hastily erected perimeter of sonic emitters and electrified fences, huddled at the bottom of a deep ravine. The structures within were little more than prefabricated containers and patched-up tents, all coated in a layer of fine, gritty dust. The air tasted of sulfur and despair. As Alara stepped off the shuttle, the ramp clanging onto the ferrocrete pad, the few soldiers who were not on patrol duty stopped and stared. They were a different breed from the polished officers at command. Their faces were gaunt, etched with fatigue and cynicism. Their gear was worn, repaired with synth tape and grim determination. They looked at her, this small, clean woman with no weapon and a clerk's insignia, with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was fresh meat, another useless body sent by the out-of-touch brass to die. Her official welcome came from Sergeant Kai, a man whose face looked like a roadmap of every failed mission and lost soldier under his command. He was the ranking officer at the outpost, a position he held simply because he had managed to survive longer than anyone else. He took the data slate with her transfer orders, glanced at it, and then gave a short, humorless laugh. "Logistics clerk, grade 3, he read aloud, his voice raspy. "Punishment detail for insubordination, Captain Jax's signature." Figures. He tossed the slate onto a nearby crate. "Well, Clerk Alara, welcome to the end of the line. We don't have a logistics division here. We have a supply tent that's half empty, and a comms unit that works when it feels like it. Find a corner to put your gear and try not to get in the way." He didn't wait for a reply, simply turned and walked away, his posture radiating a profound weariness. His message was clear: you are not welcome, you are not useful, and we do not have the energy to care about you. Alara was assigned a bunk in a cramped habitation module she shared with 3 other soldiers who barely acknowledged her existence. The menial tasks began immediately. She was put on ration distribution, then waste reclamation, then cleaning the grimy filters of the water purifiers. It was thankless, back-breaking work, designed to reinforce her lowly status. But Alara did not complain. She did not despair. Instead, she observed. As she wiped down dusty consoles and hauled heavy crates, her mind was working, cataloging, analyzing. She watched the patrol schedules, noting the routes and the times the soldiers returned, measuring their exhaustion by the slump of their shoulders and the hollowness of their eyes. She listened to their scattered conversations in the mess tent, piecing together fragments of information about the local dangers, the shadow cats that hunted in the ravines at dusk, the tremor vines that could trip a man and hold him fast, the precise locations of recent ground subsidences. While others saw a chaotic, hopeless environment, Alara began to see its hidden logic, its dangerous rhythms and secret rules. She committed the entire layout of the camp to memory, not just the official schematics, but the real layout, the weak points in the perimeter fence where the power fluctuated, the makeshift workshop where a soldier named Ren was a genius at salvaging parts, the hidden stash of high-energy nutrient paste one of the medics kept for emergencies. She organized her small corner of the supply tent with a quiet efficiency that went unnoticed, but she knew, down to the last power cell and bandage, exactly what they had, and more importantly, what they lacked. She was no longer just a clerk processing data. She was a living sensor, absorbing every piece of information in her new environment. The soldiers continued to ignore her for the most part, calling her clerk or command with a sarcastic edge. They saw her as a ghost, a remnant of a world that had forgotten them. They didn't know that this quiet, unassuming ghost was watching over them, learning the shape of their fears and the mechanics of their survival. She was building a new map in her mind, one far more detailed and accurate than any chart back at Central Command. It was a map made of dust, fear, exhaustion, and the faint, flickering pulse of hope. And she was just waiting for the moment when they would need it. The moment came, as it always did in the fracture zone, without warning. It wasn't a massive earthquake or an overwhelming attack, but a small, insidious failure that threatened to cascade into a catastrophe. The primary atmospheric condenser for the outpost, the machine that scrubbed the toxic air and provided breathable oxygen to the sealed modules, sputtered, whined, and died. A red light began to flash on the main status board, and a computerized voice announced the grim reality: life support failure. Oxygen reserves at 6 hours. A wave of quiet, controlled panic rippled through the outpost. 6 hours was not enough time to get a repair team from the nearest major base, and the next scheduled supply drop, which might have the necessary replacement parts, was at least 3 days away. They were effectively stranded in a sealed tomb, with the clock ticking down. Sergeant Kai slammed his fist against the dead condenser's casing, a gesture of pure frustration. Damn it! The primary coolant regulator is fried. Completely melted. We don't have a spare. Every unit in the sector has been requisitioned for the new forward bases Jax is setting up. His words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. The resources that could save them were being diverted for the very operation Alara had warned against. The soldiers looked at each other, the grim reality setting in. Ren, the outpost's resident tech expert, was already shaking his head. I can't fabricate a regulator like this, Kai. The alloys are too complex. We're dead in the water. The mood in the command tent grew suffocating. This was how it happened out here. Not in a blaze of glory, but with a quiet mechanical failure, a slow, silent fade to black. As the men descended into a mix of anger and resignation, Alara, who had been listening from the edge of the group, stepped forward. There might be a spare, she said, her voice calm and even. It was the first time she had spoken to the group about anything other than ration counts. Kai turned to her, his expression a mix of annoyance and desperation. What are you talking about, clerk? I just said, there are no spares in the sector. Alara didn't flinch. Her time spent memorizing a decade's worth of logistical archives was about to pay off. 7 years ago, she began, her tone precise and academic, a survey team, callsign Prospector 7, lost a mobile command vehicle in this sector. It fell into a crevasse during a flash flood. According to the after-action report, the mission was scrubbed and the vehicle was logged as irretrievable, but the manifest, A77B, listed its cargo. It included 2 fully functional atmospheric condensers of the same model as ours. A flicker of interest appeared in Kai's eyes. A 7-year-old wreck. Even if it's there, how could we possibly find it? And the location was deemed irretrievable. The report logged its last known coordinates, Alara continued, pulling up a local map on a nearby terminal. It's in the Gorgon's Maze, about 8 kilometers from here. The area is considered impassable due to the high concentration of tremor vines and the unstable cliff faces. The hope in Kai's face died. The Gorgon's Maze? No one's gone in there and come out in years. It's a death trap. We'd be torn apart or buried before we got halfway. The standard routes are a death trap, Alara corrected him gently. But the local fauna doesn't use the standard routes. All eyes were on her now. I've been tracking the migration patterns of the ridge crawlers. They're scavengers. They move between carrion sites using a network of deep-set game trails and subterranean lava tubes that are geologically stable. They can sense the vibrations from the tremor vines and avoid them. One of their primary trails passes within 100 meters of the Prospector 7 crash site. She traced a new line on the map, a winding, counterintuitive path that zigzagged through the areas marked as most dangerous. If a small team travels light and moves at night, when the ridge crawlers are active, they can follow their path. The crawlers' movements will mask your own vibrations. You can get to the wreck, retrieve the condenser, and be back before the oxygen reserves are critical. The command tent was silent. The soldiers stared at the map, then at Alara. What she proposed was insane. It went against every rule of survival in the fracture zone. But it was also the only plan they had. It was a meticulously detailed, brilliantly unconventional long shot. Kai studied her face, searching for any sign of doubt or fear. He saw none. He saw only a quiet, unshakable certainty. He had been sent a clerk as a punishment, a useless mouth to feed. But this clerk had just recited 7-year-old cargo manifests, and mapped the secret highways of the local monsters. He was desperate. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of something other than despair. "Ren," he said, his voice firm. "Get a kit. You and I are going for a walk. We're following the crawlers." He then turned to Alara, his gaze holding a new, unfamiliar emotion, respect. "You're on comms, clerk. You guide us every step of the way." The hours that followed were the most tense FOB Delta had ever known. The outpost went into lockdown, conserving every molecule of oxygen. In the dim, red-lit command tent, Alara sat before the comms console, a headset over her ears. The other soldiers, who had once dismissed her, now stood in a silent, anxious circle behind her, their eyes fixed on the terminal that showed Kai and Ren's biometric data, and their slow-moving icons on the map. Alara had become their lifeline. Her voice, broadcast into the helmets of the two soldiers navigating the treacherous darkness, was a calm, steady anchor in a sea of peril. "Turn 30 degrees west now," she would say, her eyes scanning a dozen data streams at once. "There's a nest of tremor vines 20 meters ahead of your current path. Stay close to the rock face on your left. The stone is basaltic, it dampens your vibrations on the other end." Kai and Rin moved with a tense, focused precision, trusting the disembodied voice of the clerk they had once mocked. They could hear the skittering of the ridge crawlers in the darkness around them, their unseen guides. They could feel the ground hum with the energy of the deadly vines just yards away. Every instruction from Alara was a leap of faith, but every instruction proved correct. She guided them around pitfalls they couldn't see, through narrow passages that were invisible on any map, and along ledges that seemed to hang over nothingness. Her knowledge was not just academic, it was holistic. She had synthesized patrol reports, geological surveys, and her own first-hand observations into a complete, living picture of the zone. Back at the base, the soldiers listened to the comms chatter, mesmerized. They heard Kai's terse acknowledgments, "Copy that, Alara, on your mark." Alara, he had stopped calling her clerk, he was using her name. It was a small change, but in the rigid hierarchy of their world, it was monumental. It was a transfer of authority, an admission of dependence. The quiet woman in the corner was now in command. The outpost supply officer, a grizzled veteran named Corbin, watched her with a look of dawning comprehension. He remembered how she had reorganized his chaotic supply tent just days before. He had thought it was just busy work, the obsessive tidiness of a clerk. Now he realized she hadn't just been organizing, she had been memorizing. When she'd asked him about the corrosion rates on discarded equipment from old patrols, he had brushed her off. Now he understood she was building a mental database of environmental decay. The medic, Anya, recalled Alara asking about the physiological effects of low-level seismic exposure on patrol endurance. It had seemed like a bizarre, irrelevant question at the time. Now, it was clear she was factoring human biology into her strategic calculations. Slowly, the soldiers of FOB Delta were piecing together the truth. Alara wasn't just smart. She was a prodigy, a strategic genius whose talent had been utterly invisible to the system they all served. Her mind worked on a level they could barely comprehend, connecting disparate pieces of information into a cohesive, predictive model of their hostile world. Finally, after 2 agonizing hours, Kai's voice came over the comms, breathless but triumphant. "Ilara, you were right. We're at the crash site. The vehicle is half buried, but the cargo bay is accessible. We can see the condensers." A collective sigh of relief went through the command tent. But the mission was only half over. As Rin worked to extract the heavy component, Ilara monitored the environmental sensors. "You have 20 minutes, she warned. The barometric pressure is shifting again. The crawlers are going to move to lower ground. If you're not on the trail when they leave, you'll be exposed." The return journey was a frantic race against time. Guided by Ilara's unwavering voice, Kai and Ren, now burdened with the heavy condenser, retraced their steps, staying in the shadow of the migrating creatures. They made it back to the perimeter fence with less than an hour of oxygen to spare for the outpost. As they stumbled through the gate, exhausted but successful, the other soldiers swarmed them, helping with the heavy part. Kai, his face streaked with grime and sweat, walked straight into the command tent. He went to Ilara, who was just taking off her headset, her expression calm as ever. He stood before her for a moment, and the entire outpost watched. Then, he raised his hand in a slow, formal salute. "Thank you, Ilara," he said, his voice filled with a raw, profound respect. The other soldiers, one by one, followed his lead. They saluted the clerk they had scorned. In the heart of the most forgotten outpost, in the face of certain death, Ilara had not just found a spare part. She had earned their trust. And in doing so, she had begun to subtly reshape their world, proving that true leadership wasn't about the rank on your collar, but about the clarity of your vision when everyone else is lost in the dark. The aftermath of the condenser crisis fundamentally altered the social fabric of FOB Delta. Ilara was no longer the invisible clerk. She became the outpost's secret weapon. Sergeant Kai formalized her role, moving her from menial labor to the command tent permanently. He gave her a dedicated terminal, and a direct link to all the outpost sensor feeds. "Tell us what you see," he had said simply. And so she did. Her days were now spent in a state of deep, focused analysis. She created new patrol routes that were longer but exponentially safer, guiding teams around previously unknown hazards and reducing injuries by over 90%. She developed a predictive model for the localized microquakes, giving the outpost minutes of warning before the ground shook, allowing them to secure equipment and take cover. She optimized their dwindling supplies with an almost magical efficiency, showing them how to recalibrate power cells for longer life, and how to use native flora, previously thought to be toxic, to supplement their water purifiers. The soldiers began to call her the Oracle. They would come to her before every patrol, not for orders but for insight. "Ilara, we're heading for the eastern ridge. What's the mood of the mountain today?" they would ask. And she would give them their answer, telling them about wind patterns, animal behaviors, and the subtle hum of the earth. Morale at FOB Delta, once at rock bottom, began to climb. For the first time, the soldiers felt they had some measure of control over their environment. They had a guardian angel, one who saw the invisible dangers and guided them through the darkness. Ilara, for her part, remained unchanged. She was still quiet, still humble. But the perpetual weariness in her eyes was replaced by a sharp, focused light. She had found her purpose not in a title or a rank, but in the quiet, profound act of keeping her people safe. Meanwhile, miles away, Captain Jax's Operation Serpent's Tooth was underway. He led a large contingent of well-equipped soldiers and advanced vehicles, pushing deep into the Tartarus sector along the very route Ilara had warned him against. Initial reports back to Central Command were glowing. Jax was making incredible time, his confidence swelling with every kilometer he conquered. He sent back smug progress reports that implicitly mocked the overcautious naysayers in the logistics division. Commander Valerius, the veteran officer in charge of the entire reclamation effort, read these reports with a growing sense of unease. He was a man grown weary of the arrogance of officers like Jax. He had seen too many bold plans end in tragedy. He remembered the brief, strange report about a clerk being sent to FOB Delta for insubordination after questioning Jax's plan. At the time, he had dismissed it as a minor disciplinary issue. Now, it lingered in the back of his mind. Then, it happened. On the third day of the operation, exactly as Alara had predicted, the Tethys subfracture ruptured. It was not a small tremor, it was a cataclysm. A 200-kilometer stretch of the Tartarus sector collapsed in on itself. The ground buckled and split open. Entire mountains shifted. The very geography of the region was rewritten in a matter of minutes. The holographic map at Central Command became a nightmare of red alerts and broken data links. One by one, the icons representing Jax's units flickered and died. Communications went dead. A vast, impenetrable silence fell over the operational map where Serpent's Tooth had been. Chaos erupted in the command center. Officers shouted conflicting reports. Technicians frantically tried to re-establish contact. It was a complete and utter disaster. Jax's entire command, along with several other patrol units that had been in the area, hundreds of soldiers, were gone. Vanished. Commander Valerius stood before the map, his face a mask of grim fury. Jax's arrogance had led them into a slaughterhouse. The direct and fast route had become a mass grave. Status reports, he roared, his voice cutting through the panic. The answers were all the same. No contact with Task Force Serpent, Sir. Sector-wide comms blackout, the entire area is a geological nightmare. Nothing could have survived that. The consensus was clear. They were all lost. Valerius felt the heavy weight of command settle on his shoulders. He was about to give the order to officially list all missing personnel as presumed lost, a death sentence delivered from a sterile room miles away. But as he prepared to speak the grim words, his eyes fell on a single, tiny, flickering green light on the edge of the disaster zone. It was a beacon that was still active, still reporting. FOB Delta. The forgotten outpost. The place where he had allowed Jax to send that troublesome clerk. A strange, desperate thought sparked in his mind. She had been right. That quiet, insubordinate clerk had seen this coming. And she was the only one left inside the storm. Back at FOB Delta, the world had torn itself apart. The ground had heaved so violently that the soldiers were thrown from their feet. Alarms blared as the perimeter fence overloaded and sections of the ravine wall collapsed around them. But the outpost held. It held because its critical structures had been reinforced in the very places Alara had identified as weak points days earlier. It held because its power conduits had been rerouted around geologically unstable ground according to her analysis. While the rest of the sector was erased from the map, FOB Delta, the punishment post, the forgotten scrap heap, survived. It was battered and bruised, but it was alive. In the shaking command tent, Alara was a pillar of calm amidst the chaos. She wasn't looking at the damage to their own outpost. Her eyes were fixed on the wider sector map, on the vast, dark void where Jax's forces had disappeared. The other soldiers saw only a catastrophe, a confirmed loss of hundreds of lives. Alara saw something different. She saw the new landscape. Her mind was racing, overlaying the old map with the new reality being fed to her by the surviving sensors. The earthquake hadn't just destroyed, it had created. New canyons had opened up. Old tunnels had been exposed. The entire subterranean geography had been rearranged. "They're not all gone," she said, her voice cutting through the aftershocks. Kai, who was checking for casualties, turned to her. "Alara, what are you talking about?" "No one could have survived that. The initial quake was a vertical displacement," she explained, her fingers flying across her console. "It would have dropped large sections of terrain, not obliterated them. They're trapped. Isolated. But they're not dead. Not all of them." She pointed to a series of deep-level caverns that the quake had likely exposed. "There are pockets. Voids. If they were in armored vehicles or near solid rock formations, they would have survived the initial event. They're down there in the dark, with no comms and no way out. Kai stared at her, his mind struggling to comprehend the scale of her thinking. While Central Command was writing off hundreds of soldiers, Alara was already planning their rescue. But there was a problem. A massive one. Even if you're right, Kai said, his voice heavy, how do we tell anyone? The sector-wide comms are down. We're as isolated as they are. He was right. Their long-range antenna had been smashed during the quake. They were an island, and the rest of the world thought they had sunk. For a moment, a flicker of despair crossed Alara's face. Her knowledge was useless if she couldn't share it. Then Ren, the tech specialist she had guided through the Gorgon's maze, spoke up. Maybe not, he said, a determined glint in his eye. The comms array is gone, but the transport shuttle, the one you arrived on, it has a long-range burst transmitter. It's designed for emergency distress signals. It's not powerful enough to hold a conversation, but we could send a data packet. A short 1-inch. Kai's eyes lit up. Can you get it working? I can try, Rin said. But we'd only have one shot. The power draw will drain every spare cell we have. And we'd have to bypass every safety protocol. We send one message and then we're dark. The stakes were immense. If they failed, they would have wasted their last reserves of power for nothing. If they succeeded, they had to convince a command center that believed them to be dead to listen to an impossible plan from a disgraced clerk. Kai looked at Alara. The decision was his, but the hope belonged to her. He had seen what she could do. He had trusted her with his life and the lives of his men, and she had not failed them. His choice was immediate. Do it, Ren, he ordered. Get that transmitter online. Then he turned to Alara. You have one message to save them all. Make it count. While Ren and his team worked frantically to hotwire the shuttle's transmitter, cannibalizing parts and rerouting power, Alara began to work with a terrifying intensity. She was no longer just analyzing, she was creating. On her terminal, a new map began to take shape, a rescue plan of breathtaking complexity and audacity. It wasn't one route, it was a dozen. It was a multi-stage, coordinated effort that used the new, treacherous landscape as both an obstacle and a tool. She plotted paths through newly opened lava tubes to bypass radiation hotspots. She planned to use controlled demolitions to open up collapsed tunnels. She even factored in the predicted behavioral changes of the sector's fauna, now disoriented and aggressive after the quake. It was a plan that no sane military strategist would ever conceive. It was brilliant. It was impossible. And it was their only hope. Finally, Rin gave the signal. It's now or never, Kai. I have a stable link. 30 seconds of transmission time. Max. Kai stood behind Alara. Send it, he said. With a few keystrokes, Alara sent her impossible plan hurtling through the static-filled void, a single packet of data, a single flare of hope shot from the heart of a disaster zone, aimed at a command center that had already given them up for dead. Commander Valerius was in his private office, a glass-walled room overlooking the chaotic floor of Central Command. He was composing the message he dreaded most, the official notification to the families of the soldiers of Task Force Serpent. Each word was a lead weight on his soul. He was a commander who had lost his army. His aide entered, his face pale. Sir, you need to see this. Valerius looked up, his eyes weary. What is it? More bad news. I don't know what it is, sir, the aide stammered. We just received a data burst. A single, highly compressed packet. It originated from inside the Tartarus blackout zone. Valerius was on his feet in an instant. From where? The source signature is faint, but we've traced it. Sir, it's from FOB Delta. They rushed to the main communications hub, where a team of technicians was frantically decrypting the message. The screen was a cascade of code. It's not a distress signal, sir, the lead technician said, her brow furrowed in concentration. It's a plan. A full-scale operational plan. The decrypted file opened. On the main holographic map, the red void of the disaster zone was suddenly overlaid with a complex web of blue and green lines, arrows, and timed waypoints. It was Alara's rescue plan, displayed in all its insane, intricate glory. The officers in the room stared, dumbfounded. "What is this?" one of them muttered. "A rescue operation. For who?" "There's no one left to rescue, and who sent this?" another asked. FOB Delta is a listening post with a dozen grunts. They don't have the authority or the expertise to draft something like this. Valerius ignored them. He stared at the plan, his strategic mind, honed by decades of experience, taking it all in. He saw the logic behind the madness. He saw the genius in using the lava tubes, the brilliance in predicting the fauna's response. It was a plan that broke every rule in the book, but it was also a plan that accounted for every deadly variable of the new environment. It was the work of someone who didn't just understand the fracture zone, but who felt its every tremor and pulse. "Get me a channel to the source of that transmission," Valerius commanded. "Boost the signal." "Whatever it takes, sir." "That's impossible," the technician replied. It was a one-time burst. "The source is dark." Just as despair began to set in again, a faint, crackling voice broke through the static on the main comms channel. It was weak, distorted, but it was there. "Central Command, this is Captain Jax of Task Force Serpent. Do you read?" A shockwave went through the room. Jax was alive. His voice was a ghost's whisper from the tomb. "We are trapped. Multiple casualties. Caved in. I don't know how many others survived." His signal was weak, fading in and out. "We have a plan," Valerius responded immediately, his voice booming with renewed authority. "We are looking at a rescue operation drafted by FOB Delta." On the other end, through the static, came Jax's short, incredulous laugh. "FOB Delta. The clerk. Sir, with all due respect, whatever plan she's concocted is suicide. We are in a death trap. The ground is unstable, the creatures are everywhere. We need a heavy armor extraction." By the book, this was the moment of decision. The entire command center was watching Valerius. On one side was the voice of his captain, a decorated officer, telling him to stick to protocol. On the other was a silent, impossible plan from a disgraced clerk who had been right when everyone else was wrong. The book had failed. The book had led to this disaster. Sticking to it now would be insanity. Valerius looked at the intricate, hopeful lines of Alara's plan, and then at the blank, hopeless red of the disaster zone. He made his choice. "Negative, Captain," Valerius said, his voice cold and absolute. "The book is what got you into this mess. We are proceeding with the Delta plan." He turned to his communications chief. "Patch me through to every rescue-capable unit on the eastern seaboard. Divert all resources. I want search and rescue teams, medical corps, and engineering battalions ready to move in 1 hour." Then, he did something that stunned everyone in the room. He looked at the map, at the single point of light that was FOB Delta. He knew he couldn't speak to her, but he spoke as if she could hear him across the void. "The plan is approved," he said, his voice resonating with a newfound faith. He then turned to his stunned officers. "The operation will be coordinated from here, but it will be executed under the direction of the plan's author." He pointed to the name watermarked on the data file. "Alara of FOB Delta is in command." In that moment, Commander Valerius did more than approve a risky plan. He shattered a rigid, failing system. He staked hundreds of lives, and his own career, on the unrecognized genius of a quiet clerk he had never met, turning a punishment detail into the command center for the most important rescue mission in history. The next 24 hours were a symphony of controlled chaos, conducted by a silent maestro from a forgotten outpost. While Valerius and his team at Central Command mobilized the massive logistical tail of the operation, dispatching helicopters, organizing medical triage units, and coordinating supply drops, the core of the mission, the moment-to-moment tactical direction, belonged to Alara. Using the intermittent data bursts that Rin managed to squeeze from the shuttle's transmitter, she sent a stream of updates and adjustments to the rescue teams poised on the edge of the disaster zone. Her messages were brief, precise, and prophetic. Team Alpha, delay entry by 12 minutes. A secondary tremor is imminent in your insertion corridor. Wait for my signal, Team Gamma, your route through the collapsed subway is blocked. Reroute through the adjacent storm drain system. It is flooded but stable. Watch for displaced shockeels to all teams. The disoriented fauna is attracted to standard energy signatures. Switch all equipment to low power mode. Mask your heat signatures. Move like ghosts. The hardened rescue specialists, veterans of 100 grim missions, initially balked at taking orders from an anonymous source identified only as Delta Control, but after the first few instructions proved uncannily accurate, when Team Alpha felt the ground shake exactly 12 minutes after her warning, when a drone feed confirmed the collapsed subway Team Gamma was heading for, their skepticism turned into awestruck belief. They were being guided by a ghost who could see the future. In the dark, shattered labyrinth below, the survivors of Task Force Serpent huddled together, their hope dwindling. Jax, his leg broken and his authority shattered, could only listen as his soldiers' lives depended on the clerk he had tried to destroy. He heard the rescue teams on the comms, their voices filled with a strange reverence for Delta Control. Delta Control says the cavern to our west is structurally sound. Copy that. Delta Control is guiding us in. Every mention of the name was a fresh wound to his pride, and a testament to his own catastrophic failure. The climax of the operation came when Rescue Team Bravo located the largest pocket of survivors, Jax's own command unit, trapped in a massive, collapsed underground garage. But the entrance was blocked by tons of rubble, and a network of leaking gas lines made any use of explosives impossible. They were close enough to hear the trapped soldiers, but they couldn't reach them. The situation was relayed to Central Command and a grim silence fell. Valerius watched the live drone feed, his heart sinking. They were so close. At that moment, a new data burst arrived from Alara. It contained just 2 coordinates and a single instruction: target the aqueduct supports at these locations. The resulting water pressure will clear the debris. You have a 90-second window before the entire structure floods. It was an insane gamble. It was pure, beautiful, terrifying physics. Valerius didn't hesitate. Do it, he commanded. Explosive charges were placed. The aqueduct was breached. A controlled torrent of water, precisely aimed, slammed into the rubble, blasting it away like a fire hose clearing pebbles. For a moment, the garage began to flood, but just as Alara had calculated, the pressure equalized and the water receded, leaving a clear path. The rescue team poured in. As soldiers, weak but alive, were helped from the darkness into the light, a cry went up that was echoed by the rescue teams across the sector, passed from helmet to helmet, and repeated in the stunned silence of Central Command. We have them. They're coming home. One by one, the pockets of survivors were found. A medical team trapped in a collapsed field hospital. An engineering unit pinned down in a railway tunnel. A lone scout who had taken refuge in the shell of an armored vehicle. Each rescue was a small miracle, orchestrated by Alara's invisible hand. She guided them through the darkness, her quiet intelligence a beacon for the lost. Valerius stood before the main screen, watching as the number of rescued personnel climbed. His eyes were wet. He had been prepared to lose them all. Instead, he was witnessing the impossible. An aide approached him, his voice trembling with emotion. Sir, all confirmed survivor pods are secured. The teams are pulling back. Valerius nodded, his throat tight. He looked at the map, at the dozens of green icons now moving in an orderly retreat from the red zone, a tide of life receding from a shore of death. He looked at the single, faint light of FOB Delta, the source of it all. She did it, he whispered to himself, his voice filled with a reverence that bordered on worship. That quiet clerk. She brought them all home, the phrase caught on, spreading through the command center like wildfire, a mantra of disbelief and gratitude. She brought them all home. The journey back from the brink was a slow and emotional one. The rescued soldiers, weary and wounded, were airlifted to rearline hospitals. Among them was Captain Jax, his physical injuries minor compared to the complete demolition of his arrogance. He had been carried out of the darkness by a team following the orders of the woman he had sent to her death. The humiliation was absolute, but it was also cleansing. He had seen the cost of his pride written in the faces of the men he had almost led to their graves, and he had been saved by the very wisdom he had scorned. He knew what he had to do. As soon as the rescue was complete, Commander Valerius boarded his personal shuttle. He didn't fly to the bustling triage centers or the high-level debriefings. He set a course for the single most important location in the entire theater of operations, FOB Delta. When his shuttle landed, the outpost was quiet. The soldiers of Delta, exhausted but alive, stood in a loose formation, their faces showing a mixture of pride and awe. They were no longer the forgotten dregs of the reclamation effort, they were the saviors of Task Force Serpent. Sergeant Kai met Valerius on the landing pad, and gave him the crispest salute of his life. "Commander," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Valerius returned the salute, his eyes scanning the faces of the soldiers. "At ease, Sergeant. You and your people have done the impossible, we just followed orders, sir," Kai replied, then nodded toward the command tent. "The right orders." Valerius entered the tent. It was cramped and smelled of ozone and stale coffee. And there, sitting at a makeshift console, was Alara. She was so focused on monitoring the final withdrawal of the rescue teams that she didn't even notice him enter. She was small, unassuming, wearing the same worn-out uniform. She looked less like a war hero, and more like a tired student studying for an exam. Valerius stood there for a long moment, just watching the woman, who had single-handedly rewritten military doctrine, and saved hundreds of lives with nothing but data and courage. She finally sensed his presence and looked up, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. She started to stand, to offer a formal salute, but he raised a hand to stop her. "Please," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "Stay seated." He walked over to her console, and looked at the complex data streams she was monitoring. It was a language he only partially understood. "The official reports will call it a miracle," he said, his eyes still on the screen. "But you and I know it wasn't a miracle. It was mathematics. It was observation. It was seeing what everyone else was trained to ignore." Alara said nothing, simply looking down at her hands. "I've read your file, Clerk Alara," Valerius continued. "I know why you were sent here. Captain Jax made a mistake. But so did I. I signed the order. My greatest failure as a commander was not losing Task Force Serpent. It was almost losing you." He finally looked at her, his gaze direct and filled with a profound respect. "The reclamation effort needs to change. Our entire way of thinking is flawed. We value boldness over wisdom, and authority over insight. You have shown us a better way." He gestured to the world outside the tent. "This outpost will no longer be FOB Delta. As of today, it is the Valerius Alara Strategic Analysis Center. Your new department. You will answer to no one but me. Your job will be to question everything, to challenge every plan, and to see the dangers that men like me are blind to. You are not a clerk. You are the future of this entire effort." Tears welled in Alara's eyes, but she did not let them fall. For the first time, she wasn't being punished for being different. She was being honored for it. A few days later, a visitor arrived at the newly christened Analysis Center. It was Jax. He walked with a limp, his uniform immaculate but his face humbled. He found Alara not in the command tent, but in the quiet supply bay she had first organized. He stood before her, and for a long moment, the silence was heavy with the weight of all that had happened. "I was wrong," he said, the words costing him everything and yet freeing him completely. "My pride, my blindness, it almost cost them everything. You tried to warn me. You tried to save us from myself. And I sent you here to punish you." He took a deep breath. "You didn't just save my life, Alara. You saved me from being the man I was. I don't know if I can ever earn forgiveness for what I did, but I will spend the rest of my career trying to be a man who is worthy of the life you gave back to me." Alara looked at him, and for the first time, she offered him a small, genuine smile. Everyone deserves a chance to find a better path, Captain, and so we come back to the beginning. We look for heroes in the light, but so often, they are forged in the forgotten, shadowed places. Elara's story is not just about a single act of heroism. It is a testament to a simple, powerful truth, that a person's value is not defined by their rank, their title, or the world's perception of them. True strength is the quiet courage to see the truth when no one else will, the integrity to speak it even when your voice shakes, and the resilience to hold on to your purpose even when you are sent into the darkness. Your worth is not in the praise you receive, but in the integrity you hold. So look around you. Look at the person who quietly does their job, who sees the details others miss, who offers a word of caution that is easy to dismiss. Perhaps they are not just a clerk, a cleaner, or a quiet colleague. Perhaps they are the one who sees the fault line before the earthquake. Perhaps they are the one who can bring everyone home. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that their quiet strength has a power that can shake the world. And in the comments below, tell us about a time you witnessed the incredible power of a hidden gem. Because heroes are everywhere. We just need to learn how to see them.